Hello everyone and welcome to our video series Sala Digital. Today you will be learning British history for intermediate students. Who are the British? Part 8. The Victorians. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the page. If you want private lessons, please contact the email saladialadigital2020@gmail.com. Shall we begin? This video covers the period when Queen Victoria was on the throne. It was a time of tremendous change in the lives of all Britons. From 1830 to 1901, it was called the Victorian Era. During this time, Britain became the most powerful country in the world, with the largest empire that had ever existed. Now let's go back in time. If you remember, William IV was the predecessor and uncle to Queen Victoria. He inherited the throne with 64 years of age from his brother George IV. He was the last king of the House of Hanover. In spite of being a short time on the throne, his reign had several reforms. The poor law was updated, child labor was restricted, and slavery was abolished. William IV died in 1837, 7 years after his coronation. He was succeeded by his niece, Queen Victoria. Princess Victoria was brought up very strictly. She was not allowed to speak to adults. She could not read a book without permission. When Princess Victoria became queen, she reigned longer than any other monarch. 3 years later, Victoria married a German prince and had 9 children. And Albert became his wife's closest advisor. After 21 years of marriage, he died, and Victoria went into mourning for years. She was rarely seen in public. She wore black and became known as the Widow of Windsor. Victorian Age was marked by Christianity. Christianity had a very important influence in Victorian society. Christianity also encouraged people to act in certain ways, which have since been called Victorian values. Victorian values such as hard work, or thrift, or respect for authority inside and outside home. If you remember, child labor and poverty were part of Victorian society. Dr. Barnardo devoted himself to the care of homeless children. Barnardo's homes took in, fed, clothed, and educated tens of thousands of poor children. And for those who could not get such help, a new system of poor relief had been introduced by the government in 1834. The new poor law was meant to encourage people to look for work. People in need had to go to workhouses. And in the workhouses, conditions were deliberately made harsh. Families were often split up, with males and females being separated. In the workhouses, they had to do the hard and boring work and obey strict rules. And the Victorians began to be shocked by the descriptions of workhouses written by Charles Dickens in his book Oliver Twist. During the 1800s, the use of steam power engines led to a huge increase in the number of factories in London. Many factory workers were children. They worked long hours and treated harshly. Many machines did not have safety guards, and accidents were very common at the time. And children did other horrible jobs. Small boys were sent up chimneys to sweep them by hand. And that's why Lord Shaftesbury came up. He was called the children's friend. He worked very hard to get laws through Parliament to stop young children having work. The introduction of compulsory schooling was very important for children aged between 5 and 10, and it helped to end child labor. The birth certificate was introduced as well to make it easier to check if the young workers were underage. And as more people came to work in factories, they began to group together and form trade unions. And the unions forced people to protest against their working conditions. The unions provided benefits for their members, such as unemployment pay, and women workers aroused sympathy when they went on strike. What about voting? In 1836, only one male in 40 could vote. They organized a campaign to make Parliament and voting fairer by collecting signatures for a huge petition or charter. They became known as the Chartists. The introduction of the first stamp was also important. It was called the penny post and helped groups like the Chartists to spread their ideas throughout the land by post. And so the railway travel transformed people's lives. 25,000 kilometers of track were built and over 100 railway companies were created at that time. The railways also provided thousands of new jobs. Another improvement was the first steamship, the Great Western, and it was powered by two paddle wheels. So her successful crossing of the Atlantic began the first regular steamship service from Britain to America. To transport the cargo, another type of boat was invented. An example is the cutty sark, a tea clipper, that was faster and could carry more cargo than early steamships. In 1851, Prince Albert planned a great exhibition to celebrate his achievements of British and foreign industry. This great exhibition was housed in a startling new building made of iron and glass, which was put in Hyde Park, London. It was called the Crystal Palace. And this exhibition was visited by over 6 million visitors. In terms of power, there are two big names that were very important: Gladstone and Disraeli. They were the two most famous prime ministers in Victorian England. Gladstone was the leader of the Liberal Party and Disraeli was the leader of the Conservative Party. They became great rivals who dominated Victorian politics for 50 years, but they hated each other. In 1854, Britain and France went to war in the Crimea to support Turkey against Russia. The battle, called the Charge of the Light Brigade, was one of the biggest disasters of the war. Too many British soldiers were wounded or captured as a result of a mix-up in orders. And as a result of the war to Crimea, Florence Nightingale appears. She was a nurse sent to the Crimea along with other 38 nurses. She organized the cleaning of the filthy rat-infested military hospital and organized proper nursing. The death rate fell dramatically, and nursing became a respectable profession for women. By this time, India was already a British colony. But in 1857, British rule in India was threatened by mutiny. There was savage fighting by both sides before British rule was restored. But after the mutiny, Queen Victoria became Empress of India. The Indian princes gave their loyalty to the crown, and India became known as the jewel of the crown of Queen Victoria. The Queen always said that an empire could only be achieved by fighting. Every single year of Victoria's reign, a war was being fought in any part of her vast empire. For example, in January 1879, a British army invaded Zululand. 20,000 Zulus attacked the British force, which was defeated with cruelty. It was considered a massacre. Almost all British soldiers died. But in the end, the Zulus did not win the war. They couldn't, because the British had more modern weapons. So in 1870, the British army destroyed Ulundi, the Zulu capital. And the Zulu king was captured, and the power of the Zulu army was broken. During Victoria's reign, there were many famous writers. Many of the writers were women, but because books written by women stood little chance of being published, female authors often took male pen names. It's the case of George Eliot. In fact, George Eliot was a woman, Mary Ann Evans, and she always wrote under the name of George Eliot. The greatest Victorian novelist was perhaps Charles Dickens. He was a brilliant storyteller whose books include thieves, convicts, and schoolboys. He wrote about the terrible prisons, bad schools, and workhouses. Characters such as Scrooge, Oliver Twist, and David Copperfield are known all over the world. One man whose book became a bestseller was the missionary explorer David Livingston. He was a passionate for Africa. He wrote the story of his amazing 3-year journey across the African continent, from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. And Queen Victoria died on the 22nd January 1901. All over Britain, people went into mourning and thousands of people went to her funeral. Her death marked the end of the greatest age in British history. Here you can see the tomb of Victoria and Albert in the mausoleum of Frogmore, Windsor, built between 1862 and 1871. And here we are in 1901, when Britain was one of the strongest countries in the world. Thank you. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe the channel and like the page. Bye bye.